Chapter 19, Mandatory Sorting Feast. And flying solo on this no beta, so any mistakes are of course my own. I do read over the chapters 3 times, sometimes more, but I know I don't catch everything. If you see something that doesn't make sense or is a plot hole, feel free to tell me. I do have to warn you if you got this far and it wasn't posted on the day you read it. I have a terrible habit of adding to previous chapters and reposting them, thought you'd like to know. Change made in past chapters. I didn't notice until I alphabetized the names that I created a name that came after Weasley, so I had to change Leanne Wells to Leanne Jameson. Shouldn't change the story, but I didn't want to change the sorting that much. I also had to change the name of one of the hunters to Gifford Abbott, because I had the male Dunbar, who is not in the pro-security group. Also, to let you know, I am going with the movie version of uniform. I refuse to have a bunch of teens and preteens running around in just robes and underwear. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belonged to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. Whatever you recognized belongs to her. HP later that day. Well, now night it was getting dark when the train pulled into Hogsmeade. The mutineers decided to let the rush of other students go first and then disembark from the train. Making sure they had their mirrors and crystals on their persons, well, most of them, they left the train. Furs, years over here, came the booming voice of Hagrid. The mutineers knew Hagrid, and while the Potters were at first angry at him, they soon came to realize that he was simply doing what he was told. So they forgave, but never forgot. He visited them upon the occasion, but never became a close friend of the family or the group of kids, just a nice guy that hung out once in a while. The tall, shaggy man stood to the far side of the platform, near a path that led to the lake. He had a lantern in one hand and was waving it around so that people would see him. Furs, years, gather round, mind your step. Everyone air. Good follow me, the gentle giant said, after receiving nods from a good part of the group. Carefully, they made their way on what felt like a steep path through some dark woods. A lot of the girls were clinging to their male friends to keep from slipping on the damp path. "Yale, get your furs, Cyto Hogwarts in a sec," Hagrid called over his shoulder. "Juice round this bend here." As the path opened into a large area in front of the Black Lake, you could see the beauty that was Hogwarts. It was a grandiose castle, with many tall towers and torrents. There was light coming from every window, making the castle look very fairy-tale-like. It stood halfway up a mountain and seemed to almost float in the sky, with it getting dark like it was. "No more, and a boat," Hagrid said, pointing at the fleet of small wooden boats on the shore. Harry and Gary, along with Padma and Parvati, shared the boat ride over. All of them had large grins on their faces, sharing a moment about what was to befall Hogwarts this year with the mutineers now in attendance. All good things, of course. Hagrid called for the boats to go forward, after making sure everyone had their seat. The children all watched as Hogwarts got closer, and the closer it got, the more excited or frightened the children got, as the case may be. The Potter twins were getting more apprehensive. They had a plan, but it had to be done carefully. After making it across the dark and murky lake and going up yet another long, steep path, they came to a flight of stair, and at the top was a large wooden double door. Hagrid used his plate-sized fist to knock on the door, and you could hear the echo come from within, indicating a large room on the other side. An older, stern-looking woman, that the mutineers knew to be Professor McGonagall, opened the door and stepped out. "Furs, years, Professor," Hagrid said with his customary smile. "Thank you, Hagrid." "I'll take it from here," the professor told the man, who nodded and left. She then turned to the children. "Follow me," she said in a clipped voice. The mutineers had been warned not to get on this woman's bad side. The students followed her into a large, stunning entrance hall, then down another hallway and into a smaller room. It was empty, with grey wall that had torches mounted on them, which gave off shadows in the corners, making it a little foreboding. Deputy Headmistress McGonagall gave what sounded like a well-rehearsed speech about the sorting in the houses of Hogwarts. She then left them to straighten themselves out. The mutineers grouped together and straightened the shirts, ties, and robes of the person closest to them. Soon they were all sorted. After a small scare with the ghosts, who seemed a little nervous, the professor came back in and led the now leery children to the great hall. The 4 long wooden student tables were filled with the upper years. There was one for each house, and they ran the length of the hall. There was a staff table that ran the front width of the hall, which was raised higher than the other tables, and was filled, of course, with the professors and headmaster. The room itself was easily the largest room most of these kids had seen. The ceiling reflected the night sky, and thousands of candles hung in the air. The overall atmosphere was welcoming, yet slightly overwhelming. You could almost feel the 1,000 years of magic hanging thickly in the air. In front of the staff table was a three-legged wooden stool. Upon the stool was a battered, patched, and very dirty hat. The first years were looking around with various states of awe on their faces, until the brim of the hat formed a mouth and started to sing. Oh, you may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge on what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hat sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see. So try me on, and I will tell you where you ought to be. You might belong in Gryffindor, where dwell the brave at heart. Their daring, nerve, and chivalry set Gryffindors apart. You might belong in Hufflepuff, where they are just and loyal. Those patient Hufflepuffs are true and unafraid of toil. Or yet in wise old Ravenclaw, if you've a ready mind, where those of wit and learning will always find their kind. Or perhaps in Slytherin you'll make your real friends. Those cunning folks use any means to achieve their ends. So put me on, don't be afraid. And don't get in a flap, you're in safe hands, though I have none, for I'm a thinking cap. A round of applause was heard throughout the hall as students and professors alike clapped to the song. Harry and Gary clapped with everyone else and shared a smile. This is what they had been waiting for years. It was time to put plans in motion. When I call your name, come up here and place the hat on your head, and it will sort you into your house, McGonagall stated as she pulled a roll of parchment out of her robes, unfurled it, and started calling names. Abbott, Hannah walked up to the hat with a little bit of trepidation. She placed the hat on her head and got a happy look on her face when after a minute the hat called out, Hufflepuff. The mutineers were sorted in the following order. Susan went into Hufflepuff like they knew she would. Wayne, Leanne, and Megan joined her. Terry went into Ravenclaw, like his father before him, and was soon joined with Mandy, Michael, and Padma. Tracy was sorted into Slytherin with Daphne and Malfoy, much to their distaste. Faye, Seamus, Neville, Alice, Parvati were all sorted into Gryffindor, along with Hermione Granger. They never figured that a large portion of the mutineers would go to that house. After Sally Ann Perks was sorted into Hufflepuff, and you could tell just how happy she was by the joyous look of relief on her face to be sorted with her new friends, it was time for the Potters. Potter, Gary, McGonagall called. A hush fell over the hall, then suddenly whispers were heard everywhere. Is that him? He's handsome for a young. Is that his twin? I wonder if they'll be. SHHH. I want to hear The disjointed whispers followed Gary as he made his way up to the stool with a blank look on his face. He placed the hat on his head and said, Hello, Mr. Hat. Oh ho, a polite one. Well, meet, Mr. Potter. Oh, I see you have a plan. It's a good plan, too. I've been preaching for years for a plan like this. To unite the entire wizarding world of Britain, that is quite ambitious. You would do well in Slytherin, but I see that would go against your strategy. The bravery you are showing to pull off such a grand scheme you would also do well in Gryffindor. The mastery behind this plan puts you well in the lead for Ravenclaw, but your loyalty to your brother and friends put Hufflepuff in the front. Tell me, Mr. Potter, will your plan work if you're placed there? Think carefully, the hat stated into his head. Gary sat for a few minutes running that scenario through his head and then shook his head and stated, No. In order for this to work, I have to go into Gryffindor, he thought firmly to the hat. Then it better be Gryffindor. The last word was shouted to the hall. The room exploded with noise. The Weasley twins, who knew this would happen, made fools of themselves anyway by chanting, We got a Potter, we got a Potter. Gary took the hat off and winked at his brother, who gave a slight nod back, and went to the Gryffindor table and sat next to Hermione. He was a little disappointed that she didn't listen to Harry and get sorted into Ravenclaw, where he felt she belonged. Oh well, if things worked out, they would be good friends anyway. He had hoped that if she had been there, then there would have been more inter-house relationships. Then again, maybe Harry will befriend the girl. Potter, Harry. The hall fell silent again as the name was called, and then more murmurs broke out. Harry matched his brother as he went to the stool, face blank and ignoring the whispers. He placed the hat upon his head and did the same as Gary did and greeted the hat. "Oh, another polite one. I don't think it's fair that your parents let all these kids know about me before you came. But well, what's done is done, and I see it was part of the plot. So many children trying to tell me how to do my job. It was actually a pleasant change of pace. Now where to sort you? I would like to go to Ravenclaw, if you please. Yes, I know all about your plan from you brother's head. But let me at least pretend earn my keep. I see from you memories that you would do even better in Slytherin than your twin." "But," Harry started. "No, hush. I know. I can see why that wouldn't work. The headmaster wants you there, you know. Gave me a long speech as to why he needed you there above all other houses. Even after all these years, he wants to separate you too. He should know by now he can't influence me." I see you're far more powerful than your brother, perhaps the most powerful student in these halls. Your family and Sally seem to have taught you well, little one. You would do well to heed their words and advice. Now let's see, while you are loyal, your true loyalty is only to your family, so unlike your twin that is not the house for you. Gryffindor won't do for you, while you are brave. You are not foolhardy, so it best be Ravenclaw." The last again shouted into the hall. This time there was stunned silence. Everyone had believed he would be sorted with his brother. Harry took a quick sidelong peek at the headmaster and saw his lips firm, but the calculating twinkle was in his eyes. Harry smirked inwardly. He loved it when a plan came together. He went to the Ravenclaw table, which had finally started clapping for him, and sat next to Padma. He gave a knowing nod to Terry, Mandy, and Michael, then turned back to the sorting just in time to see Ron sorted into Gryffindor. After Zabini Blaze was sorted into Slytherin, McGonagall took up the stool with the hat still perched on it and carried it away. The headmaster stood, and in a parody of Gandalf the Grey, opened his arms as if he was encompassing the whole room. He started to speak. "Before we begin our banquet, I would like to say a few words. And here they are: Nitwit, Blubber, Oddment, Tweak, thank you." And he sat back down in his throne-like chair. The tables magically filled with food. There was roast beef, roast chicken, pork chops, lamb chops, sausages, bacon, steak, joints, steak and kidney pie, boiled potatoes, roast potatoes, mashed potato, chips, Yorkshire pudding, peas, carrots, gravy, ketchup, and peppermint humbugs. Comments were passed around about the headmaster's sanity. Harry snorted as selected the foods with the least amount of fat and noted that the rest of the mutineers at his table were doing the same. Muggles may get overweight and die of heart attacks, but wizards just became lazy when they ate too much fatty food. The magic burned the extra calories, but not right away and only if they were using it. So the extra fat and calories made them lethargic. There was talk among the first years, and the mutineers made sure they introduced themselves to everyone around them. They wanted to make sure everyone knew they were approachable. Harry didn't like some of the upper years. They seemed snotty to him, and he hated stuck-up people. But he kept his thoughts hidden and smiled welcomingly. He waylaid most of the questions asked about his twin by saying, "Ask him if he wants you to know, and you're polite enough, he'll tell you himself." Then Harry would change the subject. He made a list of those who asked and what they asked, then sent a mental message off to Gary. Gary raised his head and looked at the people Harry indicated and nodded, making his own list. Harry glanced at the staff table and covertly watched the professors. There was the headmaster, Professor McGonagall, Hagrid, and Professor Snape. Those were the only ones Harry knew by sight. Then there was the other two head of houses. The tiny man must be Professor Flitwick, and the grubby woman must be Professor Sprout, he thought, and looked further down the table. There was wishy-washy-looking man next to Snape with a ridiculously large purple turban, who had his head turned to speak to the potion's master. There was a small but sharp pain in Harry's forehead, and he heard Sally whisper in his ear, "That's the Horcrux. Ignore it for now. I'll fill you in later." Harry discreetly nodded and turned to one of the upper years. "Who is that professor next to Snape?" he asked. "That's Professor Quirrell. He used to be the Muggle Studies professor. But Dumbledore gave I.M. a year off and he came back to teach the defense against the dark arts. Not sure what happened to I.M. He didn't used to be this twitchy," she answered with a shrug and went back to her meal. Harry nodded in thanks and turned back to his plate just in time for the dessert to fill the table. There were blocks of assorted ice cream, apple pies, spotted dick, chocolate gâteau, treacle tart, pumpkin tart, chocolate eclairs and jam donuts, trifle, strawberries, jelly, and rice pudding. Harry greedily took up some of the treacle tart and dug in. He was a kid. Desserts didn't count in his book. The feast finally came to a close, and the headmaster stood and welcomed everyone once again and gave a speech about magic in the hallways, no going into the forbidden forest, banned items, and not to enter the third-floor corridor, on the right-hand side, if you didn't want to die a painful death. There were going to be a lot of mirror calls tonight, and they weren't all going to be from the mutineers. The headmaster should have known better. The prefects called for the first years to follow them. And everyone stood and left the hall. They all went tiredly to their assigned dorms, and mirrors were whipped out as soon as silencing charms or security runes were applied. "Gary Potter," Harry called into his mirror after activating the security rune. He wanted to see his brother's face. "Hey, Harry, what do you think so far?" Gary said tiredly. "And why are you mirror calling me and not just broadcasting? I think the headmaster is off his rocker. I wanted to see your face. I hate not being around you. Do you think we should tell Mum and Dad?" "No, let Susan call her aunt, which reminds me we have to warn Mum and Dad that Madam Bones is keeping a sharp eye on them." "Oh, it looks like Sally wants to tell us something," Harry said as Sally appeared on his bed. "What's up, Sally?" Gary asked, hoping it wasn't too bad of news. "You need to call you parents right after we're through talking." "Voldemort is in the castle," she said, dropping that bombshell. "What?" came the twins' horrified response. "How the bloody hell did he get into the castle?" Harry asked. He was angry and confused and very, very scared. For himself, but mostly for his brother. If Voldemort was in the castle, then he would eventually go after Gary. Both boys were shaking badly, with the maelstrom of emotions running through each of them and cycling through the link. "He is on the back of Quirrell's head. The poor man is possessed. I can't touch him. As long as he has those thrice-damned Horcruxes, then he is still partially alive. I have no idea if the headmaster knows, but that's why your Horcrux was pained earlier. It will always do that when you are in the Dork Lord's presence. It is a good thing your twin ritual cleansed it grey, or that pain would have been a lot worse," Sally said, and then noticed the narrowing of two pairs of green eyes. "Oops, I forgot you didn't know that I knew, sorry," she said sheepishly. "But that is neither here or there. Call your parents. You, Gary, call your dad, Harry, your mum. You can finish your talk later." And with that, she left. Done. And both mirrors went blank. "Lily Potter," Harry called frantically. "Harry, what's wrong, sweetheart?" Lily asked as soon as she saw her pale son's face. "Voldemort is possessing one of the professors. Sally just told us. I don't know what to do. I'm nowhere ready to face him. Mum, I'm scared. What do I do?" Harry's trembling voice came over the mirror, and Lily longed to take her child into her arms and make that fear leave him. "SHHH, it's okay. Sweetheart, listen to Mummy. We're going to call Amelia as soon as we get off the calls with you two. I want you to talk to your brother. You can do it mind to mind, or no, it's better that way. Less chance of being overheard. You two talk about stupid stuff, like what pranks you're going to play, or what classes you're going to like. Even make fun of your professors, anything to get your mind off what you told me. When you're done, activate your crystal, okay?" She quickly talked her almost hysterical child down. She knew the twin bond would help, so would the crystal, and if Sally showed, then that would help too. Taking deep breaths, Harry calmed himself down. Then remembered the headmaster's warning, and even though he was going to leave it to the other mutineers, he figured since he had her there anyway, might as well tell her that as well. "Mum," he said, a lot less emotional now that he was feeding calmness to his brother and receiving it back. "The headmaster warned us away from the third-floor corridor on the right-hand side. He said we would die a painful death if we went there. Why would he tell us something was there if he wanted it hidden?" "I don't know, sweetheart. You let us adults deal with this, okay? Talk to your brother, and then try and sleep. You have classes in the morning." "Love you, baby," she crooned, trying to further relax her child. "Love you too, Mum. Done." And the mirror went blank. He had forgotten all about warning her about Madam Bones. Harry tucked the mirror away and tried to contact his brother with their mental connection. They had never tried from this distance before. "Gary, are you done talking to Dad?" "Yeah," he said. "Mum told us to talk," came the reply. "Yeah, let's talk about pranking. I can't think of anything else to get my mind off of all this crap." And so they did. Until the wee hours of the morning, they talked of stupid things, sending love and comfort between them, until they fell asleep. Unknown to them, hundreds of mirror calls were made. Those calls cause owls to fly, flues to flare, and phones to ring. Parents everywhere were contacting magical and in-the-know muggle officials. Officers were contacting their heads. Pandemonium was rapid in the wizarding and parts of the muggle world that night. Tomorrow would be a big day. Chapter 20, The First Day. And flying solo on this, no beta. So any mistakes are of course my own. I do read over the chapters 3 times, sometimes more, but I know I don't catch everything. If you see something that doesn't make sense or is a plot hole, feel free to tell me. And I'm going to put the first day in this chapter, so you have an idea on how the boys do in school. The parents and officials will show in the next. Then I will more than likely time skip through the first year. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belonged to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HP. After the mirror call, Potter Manor Lily was practically screaming for Amelia Bones at the mirror, but it just kept flashing busy. Finally, James came and took the mirror from her hands. He grabbed her gently, yet firmly, by the arms and guided her into the game room. That much emotion was a magical accident waiting to happen, even with an adult. "Lily Flower, please. You have to calm down a minute and think," James begged, holding his struggling and hysterical wife in his arms, swaying back and forth to try and get her calm. She was usually the logical one, and he needed her brain to figure out what to do next. She couldn't do that if she wasn't thinking. Lily fought to get free and out of the room. Her children were in danger, and she was not going to stand by while that happened. She needed to get to a room where the mirror worked and call someone to rescue the kids. Calm down, calm down. How the bloody hell am I supposed to do that?" she yelled in her husband's face. "Let me go, James, or so help me I'm going to hurt you." And if he hadn't had her arms pinned to her side, she would have belted him one. Lily, I need you to think. If you run off half-cocked, then who will rescue the boys? It's obvious that the boys weren't the only ones to call their folks. Other kids must have told their parents about the painful death. Listen, please, we need a plan. Do you think Amelia is going to believe that a dead man is possessing one of the professors? No, she's going to think we're, I don't know, trying to get attention or something. Lily, think, James pleaded quickly, running through all the reasons why calling Amelia was a bad idea. We need to be like the other parents and tell her about the headmaster's warning. We'll think of something when we get to the castle, either tonight or tomorrow. Come on, I need your beautiful mind to help come up with a plan. You're right. Okay, I'm calm, the less hysterical mother stated, and relaxed enough that her husband let her go. She started pacing around the room, thinking hard. James was correct. She couldn't call the head of the DMLE in a feverish fit, with no evidence, and they couldn't tell her that. Death told them they would be locked up before they knew what was happening. Lily's clearer head started going over the spells she had read about in the secret library. Was there any that could tell if a man was possessed, yet wasn't dark? She couldn't be seen casting dark magic. She thought and thought and thought, and then ran from the room to go to and look through the books. She had a plan. Next morning, Hogwarts. Gary Potter, the youngest Potter twin, heard upon waking the next morning. So he got up and grabbed the mirror from his nightstand, put it in security mode, and answered. He quickly noted the time. It was 6:30 a.m. Glad to see you're awake, sleepyhead. It's almost breakfast time. His father's smiling face greeted him, making Gary feel much better than when he went to bed. He trusted the adults in his life. Hey, Dad, I see your humor is the same as always. Did you guys work something out? He asked while trying to get the sleep out of his eyes. Harry and Gary didn't wear glasses like their father. They had gotten magical contacts when they were 10. They wanted to be known for themselves and not miniature James. They were tired of hearing, just like your father with your mother's eyes. Yes, but you're to leave it to us. I want you and the rest of the mutineers to act as if there is nothing wrong. You and your brother don't tell anyone what you know. You'll only create a panic. Your mum is telling Harry the same thing right now, James said firmly to his child, then quickly glanced to the side to see that his wife was indeed doing just that. He and Lily had been up all night going over plans with the hunters, as they were calling themselves. Your mum and I are going to be coming to the castle with the other parents, some officials, and the auras tonight, he said, looking back to his son. It'll take that long for them to get organized, Madam Bones doesn't feel that the kids are in danger at this very minute, so she's going through all the proper channels so she can search the entire castle. Expect us around dinner time, okay? All right, Dad, Gary yawned his answer. Give my love to Mum. Be careful, son, and stay away from Quirrell and the Forbidden Corridor. We love you. Done, James said and signed off. Gary got up and did his morning ritual before getting dressed and heading out, expanded book bag loaded with his course books. He had shook all the boys awake except two. He tried to wake them for 5 minutes, but to no avail, and he was going to be late if he kept trying. So he shrugged his shoulders and left. He went to meet up with the rest of the group, sans Ron and Seamus. They all met in the common room, plus Hermione. He was determined to make sure she was included in the gang soon. Dean Thomas joined them as well. Gary consulted his map discreetly, making sure Hermione and Dean didn't see it, and as one they walked down to the entrance hall with him in the lead. They waited for the rest of the mutineers so they could all go into the great hall as one. The rest of the first years started trickling in, and each person went to who they related to best. Like Susan and Hannah, made a beeline to Pavody, dragging Sally Ann behind them, and started talking about their guardian's reactions to the mirror calls made last night, much to the confusion of the new girl. It seemed that was the hot topic of the morning, and it wasn't even breakfast on the first day yet. After waiting for 10 minutes for stragglers, off to the side as to not get in the other students' way, they all went to get breakfast, chatting away, as if they weren't in separate houses. They did have to break off when they entered the hall, but it was with cheery calls and hugs that it happened. Harry and Gary glanced at the staff table to see how the group was received. They noticed most of the professors beaming with pride and happiness. On the other hand, Snape was wearing a passive face. Quirrell was trying hard to hide his disgust, and the headmaster's lips were firm, and his eyes held none of their usually twinkle. The two boys hugged each other and promised to meet in class, and when they had breaks together. Gary was a little worried about his two friends that had been sorted into Slytherin, but from the looks on the two girls' faces, nothing had happened. It was a relief. He had to remember that the only accounts he had of that house were 1,000 years old or very biased. The Slytherin parents of the mutineers were pretty close-mouthed about what went on there. It was like a traditional secret. But they only seemed slightly worried, and mostly because Tracy was a half-blood. And Gary knew for a fact that those two were taught how to defend themselves, both magically and non-magically. Gary took his seat at the Gryffindor table and started serving up his meal. There was all manner of meat: bacon, sausage, ham, scrapple, blood pudding, kippers, steak, eggs in various forms, beans, toast, cereal hot and cold, and bowls of fruit. There was water, pumpkin juice, and milk to drink. So he served himself up some cold cereal with fruit and a glass of milk. He noted that all his friends did the same, with a few adding some kippers, eggs, or toast to the side. It did make him wonder what happened to all the food that was never eaten, a project for later. It was about 15 minutes before the end of breakfast that Ron and Seamus came running into the room. "Mate, why didn't you wake us?" Ron asked, sitting down. He and Seamus loaded their plates with the fattiest food they could and started chowing down, not noticing the looks of disappointment on the rest of the group's faces, including their brothers. Almost everything these two boys did pointed to them not staying with the mutineers. It was sad. "I tried, for 5 minutes. I even told you that you were going to miss breakfast. You told me to go away. I was already running late, so I left. You can't really expect me to brush off the rest of the group just because you want a lay-in," Gary explained with a shrug. "You should have tried harder. Mum always rolls me out of bed," Ron said, as he shoveled food in his mouth, not even stopping to chew some of it. "Ron, I'm not your mum. You're 11 now and should be able to get yourself out of bed." I didn't have to roll any of the other boys out of their beds. I just shook their shoulders and told them the time, and they all got up on their own, Gary said, and nods from Neville and Dean accompanied his explanation. "Whatever," Ron said, and continued with his breakfast. Gary just shook his head. It was around this time that Professor McGonagall was handing out schedules. Unknown to the students, the four head of houses had stayed up late changing the classes around so that only two were Gryffindor and Ravenclaw. The headmaster was determined to put as much space between the Potter twins as possible. They had already done this once when Dumbledore was sure that Harry would be sorted into Slytherin. Mr. Longbottom, Mr. Potter, Mr. Thomas, I commend your efforts at House Unity. I would award points, but then I would have to award them to everyone that came into the hall with you. So let's just said that most of the professors are very proud of you and your friends, she said as she handed them their schedules. Thank you, Professor, Neville and Dean said, and Gary smiled at her, nodding his head with respect. As for you two, Mr. Weasley and Mr. Finnegan, I expect better punctuality from you in the future, she stated firmly to the two still eating as she placed their schedules next to their plates. Yes, ma'am, Seamus said as he finished his plate and looked at his timetable. Ron nodded his head to her as they continued to chew his food. McGonagall continued down the table handing out schedules. Gary looked at his piece of parchment and noticed that he only had transfiguration and herbology with Harry. Looks like it's beginning, he thought to his brother. Yep, it's okay though, we'll make sure we study together. I've been thinking we should get the group to study here in the hall. That way we can subtly rub it into the headmaster's crooked nose, and he can't do a thing about it. Not without making himself look bad. We'll still work out a way to get a room for the practical stuff. Harry sent back, not even looking in Gary's direction. We have herbology first, and then I have a break, then charms. What do you have? I have defense against the dark arts, then a break, and then potions. Where are you when I'm in potions? History, Gary thought, looking over his timetable. Well, that's today's schedule. We have afternoon study time together. It is so much different than the other school. There's so much free time. We'll have to look into clubs or something. I have astronomy on Tuesday. When do you have it? Wednesday. Okay, that sounds good. We have transfiguration tomorrow first thing. Then I have potions again. Then we have herbology. I have a break at 10. When is yours? Mine is at 9, but we both have lunch together and we can study after. We'll meet with the rest of the mutineers in the library and check out the books we need and gather at the Raven. No, that table will be full. How about the Hufflepuff table? Sounds like a plan. Hey, everyone is getting ready to go. Try and behave, came a mocking reply from Harry. Pratt, Gary sent back. He gathered up his book bag, and the first-year Gryffindors meet up with the first-year Ravenclaws. They all made their way to Greenhouse 1. Professor Sprout was a happy-go-lucky woman who you could tell loved her job. She taught them the safety measures that were needed to work with magical plants. The first-year plants and fungi weren't deadly, but they could give you a nasty welt if you didn't pay attention. Dragonhide gloves were brought out and used to rip apart a simple snapdragon plant. This plant had a horrible habit of biting anyone who came within its reach, and though it wasn't poisonous, the bites did hurt. It was a good thing that its reach was only 2 inches and the snapping heads were 6 inches from the roots. So you only had to tip the part to the side and grab the bottom of the plant, gently pull it out, carefully tip the plant upright, and there is where it got tricky, avoid the heads, and put it in the bigger part. Neville was a great fountain of advice, and all the first years listened to him. Hermione was especially grateful. This was something not told in the books. The class ended on a good note. No one was hurt. The Potter twins were happy to note there was a mirror right next to the exit. They assumed that meant it was connected to the important offices in the school. They did wonder why Professor Sprout didn't point it out. Maybe she wasn't used to it and had forgotten. Then Gary made his way to his break and Harry to Dada. Today's classes were only covering theory for now. The practical lessons would start later. The mutineers knew most of the theory, thanks to Remus and Lily. But they still learned stuff those two hadn't covered, since their teaching was years old, and some new stuff had been discovered, which made everyone feel less bored. Professor Quirrell was a nervous man, though only Harry knew truly why, whose stutter was horrendous. It was almost impossible to make out what he was saying. His turban would bob with his stutter, making him look absolutely ridiculous. The room smelled of garlic and was kept dark. Harry's scar hurt every time the professor turned towards the board, which was a lot. Most of the class tried to follow along with their books and were doing okay with that. It was decided that this class would need extra study. Professor Flitwick was like Professor Sprout in demeanor. He was a rather short, cheery man that loved his profession. He did get a little excited when he called Gary's name, but settled down afterward and taught them the safety measure on charms, warning them that a miscast charm could be potentially fatal, something about a water buffalo smushing them. The first half of class, like the others, was on theory. They spent the second half of the class using a stick, going through the 6 basic wand motions. Before everyone left, Professor Flitwick pointed to the mirror by the door and gave some brief instructions about what it was for. So the 2 classes went as well as they could. Harry went to potions class with a great deal of trepidation. He knew that Professor Snape had told his mum that he would ignore the twins and impart the mutineers, but Harry was also told by his dad that the man was still holding a grudge. Much to his surprise, the class went off without a hitch. They didn't brew that day, but spent the class much like the others, going over theory and safety protocols. Gloves were brought out again, and it was a good thing Professor Sprout made them clean them before they left her class, though Professor Snape suggested they get 2 pairs. Then ingredients were prepared for the next class, which was when they were going to brew a boil relief balm. Gary's history class was anything but calm. Not 5 minutes into the dead boring class, just as students were falling asleep, Sally showed up. "Well," she huffed from right behind Gary's shoulder, making him jump. This caused Hermione to look at him quizzically. He just gave a slight shake of his head and continued to look forward. "This will never do. I'm not letting my boys learn from this has-been," the embodiment of death stated, and with a determined look on her cute little face, she stomped up to the front of the class, walked right through the desk, and tapped the professor on the forehead, causing him to stop talking and look up. "Teach or leave," she said in finality. "What?" asked the confused ghost of a professor. He startled as if coming back to himself, and he looked about the classroom for the first time in a very, very long time. I don't remember any of you." He scratched his withered chin with his short fingers. "Why are you in my class?" he asked the students, peering through his glasses. The class just stared at him, except for a few who had their hands raised to answer. "I'll give you one chance, Cuthbert Binns. You can stay here and teach proper or leave," Sally said, bringing his attention back to her by getting in the confused professor's face. "Who are you?" he asked, and peered at the little girl. She had no school robe on, so maybe she was a muggle and didn't know this was a magic class. He wondered how she could have gotten past the wards and into the castle proper. He didn't seem to notice she was standing in his desk. The few that had fallen asleep, startled awake, and were watching the now believed crazy professor talk to himself. "I'm Death," Sally replied with a steel glint in her eye, which was out of place on that lovable little face. "You're dead, so straighten up or leave," she repeated as she floated to the top of the desk. Then she stomped her foot, which made her look more endearing than threatening. "Oh my," he said in sudden realization, looking down at his see-through hands. "I'm dead. I've always wanted to die. Now I can meet so many historical people. Thank you," he said to Sally, who gave an adorable little giggle, angry face fading as if it had never been. Binns then turned to the gobsmacked class and said, "Well, I must be off, children. History waits for no man." And with a jaunty wave, he floated through the chalkboard to his next great adventure. "Much better," said Sally, turning to Gary, with her hands on her hips and a beaming smile on her face. "I'll be right back, Gary. Try and study or something." She had just the person in mind, Isabel Watts, who had been 25 when she died in 1977. Isabel had volunteered to come and teach as soon as someone got rid of Binns. She had been whining at Sally for years about how horrible he was. Unfortunately, Sally had a few more important things to worry about than some worn-out history teacher, like tending her boys. Gary nodded his head too much in shock as to what had happened to do anything else, though he did make a mental note to talk to Sally about her appearance. It was hard to take a 6-year-old seriously, especially one as adorable as Sally. Shaking his head and putting that thought away for later, he pulled out his book and started reading the first chapter. He noted that half the class was doing the same. However, some, like Ron and Seamus, were getting up to leave. They stopped when they heard an older female voice say sharply, "Sit down, all of you." The miscreants scrambled back to their seats and stared at the woman in front of them. She was a tall and slender ghost, with a nice womanly figure, and looked to be in her upper 20s. She had what appeared to be brown hair, pulled into a tight bun on the back of her head. And well, they couldn't tell what her eye color was because it was so bleached out, so they probably had been light blue or gray. She was dressed in formal teaching robes and had a ghost of a ruler in her right hand, and was tapping it into the palm her left hand. Sally had altered her clothes and given her the ruler to make her appear more professional. My name is Isabel Watts. I was a Ravenclaw here in the late 60s, early 70s, she stated, looking around the class as they all started to settle. I studied for years to be the professor of magical history. However, before I could take the position, I was killed by Voldemort. She ignored the gasps during his reign of terror. I received an O on my newts, nastily exhausting wizard's test. You'll take them to graduate, she explained, seeing the confused looks. Thanks to my good friend, Sally, I'll be taking over for this class. Now sit down and open your books to chapter 14. The class complied, and Professor Watts taught an amazing class. She started by telling them all about the Grindelwald Wars and the headmaster's role in them. Gellert Grindelwald was born 1882, the lecture began, and was considered one of the most powerful dark wizards of all time in Europe, second only to Tom Marvolo Riddle, who later became known as Lord Voldemort, she said, and glared at the gasps coming from some of her class. Mr. Grindelwald was schooled at Durmstrang Institute until his expulsion. History is not sure why he was expelled, though rumor has it that it was for practicing the dark arts on the students and faculty. The Durmstrang Institute is a wizarding school that is notorious for teaching the dark arts. It is located in the northernmost regions of Norway or Sweden. We're not sure exactly where. They tend to keep it as a secret. Durmstrang has, however, taught students from as far afield as Bulgaria, she explained, remembering this was a class of first years, some of whom had never heard of magic until maybe 6 months ago. Quills were heard scratching all through the class. Most didn't want to miss a thing. Professor Watts looked around the room to make sure everyone was paying attention and then continued when she saw they were. Later, Grindelwald fostered a friendship with Albus Dumbledore while living in Godric's Hollow for a summer with his great-aunt, Bathilda Bagshot. As you know, Professor Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore is the headmaster of this school. He is a half-blood wizard, the son of Percival and Kendra Dumbledore, and the elder brother of Aberforth and Ariana. His father died in Azkaban when Dumbledore was young, while his mother and sister were later accidentally killed. His early losses greatly affected him early on, but in turn made him a better person. Gary scoffed quietly, earning another look from Hermione. He ignored her and continued to take notes. Albus Dumbledore is considered to be the most powerful wizard of this time. He is mostly famous for his defeat of Gellert Grindelwald, the discovery of the 12 uses of dragon's blood, and his work on alchemy with Nicholas Flamel. We'll learn about him in another class. And he became the Transfiguration Professor and later headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Headmaster Dumbledore now serves as Supreme Mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards and Chief Warlock of the Wisengamot, Professor Watts continued on, in a sharp voice that garnered no nonsense. The two young men, Gellert and Albus, made plans to find the Deathly Hallows. She paused, seeing more blank looks. The Deathly Hallows are said to be 3 highly powerful magical objects supposedly created by death and given to each of 3 brothers in the Peveril family. They consisted of the Elder Wand, an immensely powerful wand that was considered undefeatable, the Resurrection Stone, a stone which could summon the spirits of the dead, and the Cloak of Invisibility, which, as its name suggests, renders the user completely invisible. We will learn about the Peverils in another class, she said, ignoring the grumbles. According to legend, he who possesses these 3 artifacts would become the Master of Death. Though this is just that a legend, there is no base in facts, she informed them, with a firm look in her eye, confirming that this was not a fact. She knew the Hallows were real, but Sally asked her to make them a myth. Isabel was to consider it a payment for bringing her here. It went against her grain as a history teacher, but every word she said was true. There was no evidence in the real world they were real. Grindelwald and Dumbledore wanted to find these and wield their newfound power as masters of death, leading a wizarding revolution with the aim of ending the international statute of secrecy and creating a benevolent global order led by wise and powerful witches and wizards, Professor Watts continued. Their partnership fell apart after the two were involved in a 3-way duel with Aberforth Dumbledore that resulted in Ariana Dumbledore's death, she summarized. realizing she didn't have much time with this class as it was almost over. Grindelwald then left Britain and soon stole what was believed to be the Elder Wand, proceeding alone with the revolution he and Dumbledore had planned. He established a power base in continental Europe at the fortress he built, called Nurmengard. He was a highly idealistic man, but greatly uncaring about anything but his quest and his links with the dark arts. He was a revolutionary who operating outside the law. He was not a wanton killer or torturer, she educated them steadfastly, tapping her ghostly ruler on her hands, punctuating her words. But he and his followers, in a single-minded and unpopular pursuit, committed numerous crimes, including several known murders. His allies must often be unsavory characters as well. In 1945, at the height of Grindelwald power, Professor Dumbledore confronted and defeated him in a legendary duel. Grindelwald was subsequently imprisoned in his own fortress, where he resided to this day, she concluded. Now for homework. I want you to look up and find anything you can about Grindelwald, his fortress and his army, and give me a 1-foot essay. No more than 1 foot. You need to learn to be concise, to be turned in the next class. She would have to figure out a way to read those essays, perhaps enlisting one of the Newt students. It was a much better class than Gary thought they were going to have. He nodded to Sally and left with the rest of his class. He couldn't wait to tell his brother. HPHPHPN. Most of that lecture was adapted from Harry Potter Wiki, which I don't own. I've also used it in Little of This, More of That, as a one-shot called Replacing Bins with Isabel, and at the end of Harry Breaks Free. So if you've read those 2 stories, sorry for the repeat. I just feel history is very important. Chapter 21, Chaos Reigns. And flying solo on this no beta, so any mistakes are of course my own. I do read over the chapters 3 times, sometimes more, but I know I don't catch everything. If you see something that doesn't make sense or is a plot hole, feel free to tell me. And for those of you receiving the update today, I've gone back over the last few chapters and filled in a few plot holes, such as the mirrors in the classrooms. They probably aren't important, but if someone suddenly uses an emergency mirror in the future, you'll know that it was something I added to the previous chapters. Disclaimer: I don't own anything related to Harry Potter. That privilege belonged to J.K. Rowling and all those who she lets make money for her. HPHPHP September 2, 1991 lunchtime, all the Hogwarts students sat at their house tables eating a filling lunch of roast beef, part roast pork with apples, roast lamb with green beans and mint sauce, pork pies, sausage rolls, sandwiches of all sorts, plates crisps and chips, Cornish pasties, cured ham, salad, potted shrimps and freshly smoked fish. There was the always present pumpkin juice, water and milk to drink. Harry happily loaded his plate with fish and chips, his favorite, added some salad, and a glass of pumpkin juice. Gossip about the history class was sweeping through the hall. It even overpassed the parents' and officials' visit. Harry was keen on what his brother had to say about it. A lot of the upper-year students were excited for what was sure to be the only true history lesson they had ever received in this school. As the word spread, you could see that the headmaster was not happy. And Harry couldn't wait to hear what his reaction would be. Sally could be very mischievous when she wanted to be. He did notice the house ghosts had settled down, so she must have talked to them and calmed their fears about her being here. Lunch ended, and the Gryffindors and Ravenclaw mutineers got up and meted entrance to go to the library. The Hufflepuffs and the Slytherins had had the first period off, and now they had to attend the one more class. They would all meet later at the Hufflepuff table for studying. Gary went immediately to his brother and gave an exciting rendition, in their mental talk, of what happened in history. The 2 boys laughed at Sally's antics and made their way with the group to the library, where everyone quietly went about getting the books they needed for homework. It wasn't until an hour later they heard what the headmaster's reaction was. Third-year Gryffindor and Slytherin class had been interrupted by the man, and the twins told the tale. You should have seen, started Fred as he sat down next to Harry. How mad he was when, continued George sitting next to his brother. He came storming in the class. He heard what she was teaching us and started commanding that she stop. It must have been the same lesson she taught you, Gary, all about the Grindelwald War. They finished together, grabbing treats that were left out for the students. Yeah, I think she's going to teach everyone that. Gary said as he nodded. Fred, tell us what happened. It'll go faster without the twin speak. Fred nodded, sipped the juice he just poured and took up the story, having everyone's attention. Well, like we said, the headmaster came into the class, and when he heard what she was teaching, he demanded that she stop. She just laughed at him and told him that no one can stop history. He then told her to leave, that he was in charge of staffing, and he hadn't hired her. She laughed again and said she came to be here on a higher authority. Said something about some bird named Sally, he said, waving hands and arms for emphasis. The Potter twins exchanged knowing looks, which was missed by almost everyone, and those that did notice just figured it was a twin thing. Fred had another sip of juice and continued. Dumbledore got even angrier and tried to banish her. Professor Watts just stood there defiantly and let him try. He couldn't do it, the young man said with a shocked look on his face. After all, this was Dumbledore. Then Professor Watts pointed out that he was in the middle of a class of students and that then might not be the best time to be having an argument. The headmaster seemed to shake himself back to the present, nodded, and stormed out of the room. George was nodding along with his twin. Well, that went well, I guess, Harry laughed. He knew that Sally would have made it so any ghost she placed in the castle couldn't be banished by anyone but her. I kinda feel sorry for the man, Padma said, ignoring the snorts from a large portion of the group. I mean, some of his secrets are out in the open now. I would hate for secrets I had kept for years to be sudden public knowledge. Not that I have secrets, just saying, she completed with a shrug. I, on the other hand, said her twin with a dazzling smile, think this is fabulous. Not even here one day, and all sorts of juicy gossip is milling about. The talks went on quietly through study hour, and then the students got up to go to put away their books and get ready for dinner. Anticipation filled the air as they remembered the mirror calls from parents and guardians that were received that morning. It was during dessert that the doors slammed open, and the minister, Madam Bones with 20 red-robed auras, 5 men in blue robes, and a large group of angry parents marched into the hall. The professors were shocked, though not most of the students. Harry did wonder how that bit of gossip never made it to the staff table, or maybe it had, and they just blew it off as a lie or tall tale. A medium-tall, pudgy man, dressed in a revolting green suit covered with an equally hideous green robe, carrying a lime-green bowler hat, was in the front of the group. The mutineers knew this to be the new Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. Dumbledore, what the blazes is going on here? Minister Fudge said, rotating his bowler hat between his hands. I've been receiving owls and flu calls all day. Even the Muggle Prime Minister's portrait has been bugging me. I am a very important man, Dumbledore, and I don't have time for your games. Ah, Minister, Governors, Madam Bones, and the rest of you good ladies and gentlemen, whatever this issue is, I am sure we will sort it out. I have everything here under control. I am concerned that the students felt it necessary to contact their parents and get them into hysterics over nothing, the headmaster said, sweeping his disappointed look over his half-moon spectacles towards the entire student body. He noticed that most were cowed, though a surprising number of first years looked on defiantly. He cursed himself for not remembering the mirrors. He had tried to get them banned, but was overridden by the board. Amelia Bones, in her role as Susan's aunt, stepped forward and stated in a very firm voice, "Don't you pull that on us, Headmaster. Telling children not to go somewhere is like giving them candy and telling them not to eat it. I will tell you right now, if my Susan had been hurt or killed by a painful death, I would have hunted you down and shown you just what a painful death was," she said, and the look of such a promise was clear on her face. Many of the parents behind her had similar looks. Then switching roles to head of the DMLE, she then turned to her auras and said, "You three," pointing to the closest, "go find out what is on the 3rd floor and get rid of it. Check to make sure that there is nothing else that will harm the students. The rest of you inspect this castle from top to bottom. If you find anything that should not be here, confiscate it and take it to the ministry." The auras indicated, dispersed to do as they were ordered. 3 stayed behind to protect the board and minister. Amelia turned back to the front of the room to watch the fireworks, a satisfied look on her face. Many of the parents and officials noted the looks of apprehension on Snape's, Dumbledore's, and Quirrell's faces, though Quirrell seemed to be the most concerned. Once the auras took off, all of the parents went to check on their kids. The board, the minister, and Amelia were in the front of the room arguing with Dumbledore. Behind a silencing charm, Snape was at the headmaster's side. The rest of the professors were sitting in the confusion, not sure what they should be doing. The two adult Potters, Sirius and Remus, went to the hall doors and motioned the twins to join them. "We have a plan," the mother whispered while giving a hug to Gary. "I've been working on it all day. There is a powder that will expel a spirit from a person who is possessed. It won't kill them, but they may be in a coma for a few months. What we need to do is get close to Quirrell. I want you two to sit here and wave your arms about and then point to him, like you are either mad at him or disappointed," Lily suggested quietly after rising from the hug and a concerned look upon her face. "After that, me and your mum will go towards him looking like we're troubled. You two go back to your tables with your godfathers and friends, and no matter what, stay there. I tell you to go to your dorms, but I think Amelia wants everyone to stay here until the auras are done searching," James said, also giving the boys an anxious look. The twins nodded and did as suggested. They started to complain about the stuttering, and Harry pointed to his scar on 2 occasions, all the while pointing at the ever-scared professor. The Potter parents glanced up to see Quirrell pale even more when the boy pointed to his scar. And just when he rose from his chair, and it looked like he would run, the 2 adults turned as one, and with a determined look on their faces moved to the front of the room. Their looks pinned the stuttering professor in place. Other parents watched them go, and some were tempted to join them after hearing their own children's interpretation of the Dada class. 1 or 2 did get up and start forward. The Potters stopped and waited for the other parents, and then started forward again. They didn't want to be the only ones around the professor when the spirit left the body. Each godfather stayed with their godson to make sure they didn't run off to help their parents. Unnoticed by everyone, a small cloud of clear dust was being pushed forward in front of the Potters, James utilizing the little wandless magic he was capable of. You would only notice it if you were looking for the very slight shimmer the dust created, which would be confused with any other gust of dust. The dust won't hurt anyone who is not possessed, though it might make them a little yellow-skinned. The turban-wearing professor stood nervously by his chair, hands twisting around themselves, shifting his feet back and forth as if undecided whether to run or not. The parasite on his head wasn't worried. He felt these people below him, and that nothing could touch him in the state he was in. Voldemort cared little for the man he had taken unwillingly, Muggle study professor indeed. The self-claimed Dark Lord's only concern was getting the stone, so he ordered the wishy-washy man to stand still and listen to the parents' rant, just like any other professor would do. Just when Quirrell opened his mouth and raised his hands to try and calm the parents coming toward him, the cloud hit. With his mouth opened, he inhaled some of the dust, and the rest settled on his face, hands, and clothes. A high-pitched scream was heard throughout the hall. A second scream joined it. Everyone turned just in time to see the turban fly, unaided off of the screaming professor. A dark wraith was being expelled from the back of the poor man's head, and you could feel the dark magic coming for the ugly, distorted face. Many children scrambled under the tables. Yells of fear echoed everywhere. Others clung to their parents, crying that they wanted to go home. Still others pulled their wands. Shield spells were popping up everywhere as the upper ears were trying to protect the younger ones around them. Parents started to do the same. The professors all jumped from their seats when the second note of the screams hit the air and were forming a circle around the falling professor. When they saw the spectre, they too put up the strongest shields they knew. The parents that had been moving forward to talk to the man all had stunned looks upon their faces. They knelt down away from the screaming form, all of them quickly duck-walking to their children. Dumbledore, Amelia, and the board also had their wands out, but their lips were forming counter-curses to protect the rest of the hall. The minister was hiding under the staff table. The 3 auras were surrounding him in battle-ready stances. The Wraith of Voldemort looked around, and seeing he was vastly outnumbered, and there was no way he could possess someone without being seen, fled through the owl post hole to parts unknown. He was screaming his revenge on the entire way. Madame Pomfrey ran to the downed man and quickly started doing diagnostic spells. She looked up to the staff and gave them a nod of her head, letting them know that he was alive. Amelia came forward and put unbreakable cuffs on him just to be sure, and indicated that the nurse could take him away for treatment. She motioned one of the auras that had been assigned to protect the minister to accompany the nurse. A large sigh of relief was heard all around the hall, as was the scraping of benches and tables as the children, the minister, and some parents slowly climbed out from where they were hiding. The crying slowed and screams stopped, and after about 10 minutes' whispers, excited voices started filling the air. You could see that a vast majority of the school was still scared, that had been Voldemort after all. But the danger was over for the time being, and in the form he was in he was mostly harmless, barring another possession. Malfoy SR, who was part of the board, had a calculating look upon his face. The fear in his eyes could also be seen. He had worked far too hard to get where he was to just go back to bowing to an evil man, and if his son's reports on rumors, spread by the mutineers on the train, was anything to go by, a half-blood, he would have to make plans, and soon. Everything else was inconsequential as of now. A loud bang was heard, and all eyes turned to the front of the hall and landed on the imposing figure of the headmaster, his face recomposed into the gentle grandfather facade he liked to portray. Now that the excitement is over, everyone please take a seat and enjoy the desserts that the Hogwarts house elves are famous for. When I am done reassuring the board and Madam Bones that all is well at Hogwarts, the children can toddle off to bed. It is a weekday after all, he said with his gentle smile and eyes twinkling away, as if the wraith of Voldemort was an everyday occurrence and absolutely nothing to worry about. He then turned back to the people surrounding him, put up a silencing charm, and started the argument anew, with his kind and gentle face still in play. Many parents, forgetting what they were originally here for, took the headmaster at his word and started to reassure their children. Wasn't until an aura came running into the hall and up to Amelia, whispering in her ear what they had found on the third floor, that they remembered why they were at the school in the first place. Still, they wanted their children to not be frightened, so instead of using the headmaster's words, they used the actions of the ministry. Soon, the satisfied families were enjoying the dessert and chatting about the new ghost teacher. Once again, the Marauders and Lily went to the front of the hall and motioned the twins over. "Are you guys okay?" asked Padfoot, his eyes taking in every facial expression that went across the boys' faces. "Well, we certainly weren't expecting that, but now that he is gone, yeah, we're all right," Harry answered for them, rubbing his forehead to dispel the pain in his scar. And it is true, Quirrell had been their primary concern. The third floor could have been avoided, but the professor couldn't. "Okay, that's good. I'm glad you two are okay. That was kinda scary, huh, pups?" Sirius said, ruffling the hair of the twins, trying to lighten the mood. Lily smacked him upside his head, giving him a smile to show she wasn't angry and appreciated his efforts. She then knelt and hugged the boys for a job well done. The way they pulled this off couldn't be tied to the Potters. There was nothing on their persons that would indicate they had anything to do with the expelling of the Dork Lord. They had confined the dust in a magic bubble which had hung over James, head the entire time he was with the group that had descended on Hogwarts. "Mum, Dad, you guys have to be careful. Susan said her aunt doesn't trust you all the way because you are keeping her out of the loop. So she said the Madam Bones is going to be watching you. Just keep on the lookout, all right?" Gary whispered urgently in a worried voice. "Don't worry, sweetheart. After what happened with Rita, we're being extra careful," Lily soothed, petting his hair back into place. They then joined the rest of the children and their families until they were told by the head of the DMLE that they could go home or to bed, as the case may be. It wasn't until the next day that anyone knew what was on the third floor or how Dumbledore was reprimanded.